sound while you turned off your camera, is that
Exactly.
we record all of these, so you can actually go back and see all of them for the front. Today we're in chapter 7.
Okay.
So there, if you feel lost today a little bit, because the book of Joshua does evolve a little bit different than Isaiah, where each chapter seems to be on the same theme but different. You can go back and catch up. And I think on that page that you'll get once a week, there's also all the texts. And if you need any help with that, just send a note to Madalena. She'll help you with that.
Oh,
Okay,
thank you.
great.
Shall I mute now?
No, you can, no, we actually keep this one open unless there's any noise. So it's more of a free conversation as opposed to, say, Shabbat prayer sessions. So you can stay on and you can chat with Sue, who just celebrated her birthday day before yesterday, or on Christmas Day, right?
Christmas Day.
All right. Okay. And
So I felt that I've been 83 for a couple of months.
83 for a couple of months. Okay. Pag. Well, Pag in Pei Gimel 83 in Gematria, it's also a baby who's a newly born baby.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it's like you look like you're a baby. What can I say?
Okay.
Hello, Troy. Welcome again, and Megan. Good to see you, Dan. And Dan, I have an apology to make you that I keep forgetting to make you, and I apologize for keep forgetting to make this apology. I should have called you out and at the concert, the Jews Do the Blues, to introduce you as our board member. I could say that I didn't want to embarrass you, but no, I just didn't think of it until afterwards. So I apologize.
No problem.
Okay, so now we're both here.
Then now we can start. Yeah, so we've got a few medical challenges in the community right now. I think many of you know that Richard broke his knees and is in Mammoth on his way down in the next day or two. I think will be in a wheelchair for a while. He says he's not in pain, but I'm not sure I believe him.
Yeah,
And
right.
and Sally's getting better from COVID. We will be in person for Friday night services in a week from this Shabbat. And we'll have a visiting rabbi from Toronto. I think maybe we'll do a little bit more than challah for refreshments, assuming people can get there. I know it's difficult for some people to drive when it's so dark outside this time of year. And I'm just wasting some more time until more people sign on, so we don't have to start over. So feel free to chat.
Megan, you look like you're cold.
Oh, I'm unmuted. It is cold here in San Diego I'm in Carlsbad Village. It's by the ocean, so it's a little colder. I'm probably not everybody's out there in shorts and shirts, but I'm older, so I warm up and then I'll start taking things off as we go on. But I like the fresh air and it's cold.
Oh,
Did I hear it was your birthday?
yes, Monday was my birthday.
Oh, happy birthday.
Thank you.
Happy birthday. Yeah. Now that you're speaking of it, I am hot. I'm taking off my sweater.
Happy birthday indeed.
Thank you.
It's about 50 degrees in Southwest Virginia, but it's rainy and damp, so forth and so on. So I likewise, I don't like being cold, so I would rather wear a little extra and then have a layer to take off if needed.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Rita, how do you feel? Rita,
Uh, the same as I did yesterday, I'm afraid. I'm not a very good patient. I'm a cranky patient.
is it, but does it feel any better?
No, not yet. It's going to take a while. You know, the older you get, the longer it takes for bones to heal.
Yeah.
So, anyways, but it will. It will. I still have my left hand.
Okay.
Okay, it's good to have everyone here. As you notice from your mailbox and for both your inbox and email and your paper mailboxes, that this is the time of year where organizations remind everyone to that if I will say it this way, talk to your tax advisor, whether it's your CPA or your bookkeeper or whoever you do, and see if there's any benefit to giving more than you have this year, and keep us in mind, please. While the fundraiser did very well, especially compared to previous years, our overall monthly income has gone down actually quite a bit. People moved away, people downsizing their giving. So if you are able to, I say this and emphasize again for all those who are not so, don't live close by and don't know us. Under no circumstances should anybody understand that there is charge for these classes. We want to keep them open to everybody all the time. On the other hand, there are needs for the nonprofit. So if you're able to make an end of year gift, please do. Now we move to the text. We're going to begin with the last two verses of last week because they're connected. They're very much connected. This is still part of the Jericho story, and we could have talked a lot more. Malk, I want to thank you again for bringing up the archaeological question of if there are no finds, no strata in the digs of Jericho, which has been dug for, I don't know, over 100 years. From the time that this purports to be, then this story is not historical. When I first learned about that in the 80s, the early 80s at Hebrew University, I said, wow, really? Well, that's well, I got to think about that. It's so understood today. I don't take really any of this seriously from a historiosity point of view, historical point of view. To me, that doesn't give it any less meaning, not at all, of course, as you know, and I think that's the flavor of our studies here for everything that we do. It's not about the historical realities that we're talking about of the time that the stories purport to describe, but it's more about the messages that are in the narrative. Oh, so what is the text trying to tell us? And what the text was trying to tell us last week is that the Israelites conquered this heavily fortified city. True, it seems there's a tradition with the help of information they had that they got through Rahava Zonah. But when they did the actual walking around and with the shofars, with the ram's horns and the ark and the priests and whatever they did, and all rushing in at the same time from different directions, what's clear from that is God was involved. This was a miraculous victory. That is the underlying truth. I put truth in quotes or truth in bold of the narrative the way we have it. We go back to the age-old example that I remember in one of my first years that we were studying about miracles in the Bible, different stories of miracles, and somebody of course brought up to Professor Yair Zakovich, who is still my very close friend. Yes, but Professor Zakovich, with the parting of the Red Sea, don't we know today that it was probably just high tide, low tide? So he said something like, if it was in English, he would have said high tide, shmai tide. He says, all I know is what the narrator is telling us. The narrator is saying to us that the water was like a wall on the right and like a wall on the left. We had something similar in Jordan. In other words, the narrator isn't saying it's been high tide, low tide. It's not about what happened. What was the basis for, or was the basis for some real story in reality, or from story that never happened, that somebody just dreamed up in their imagination. The message of the story was that the forces of nature were altered on behalf of the people of Israel by God, by Adonai, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, the God of Israel. And that's what we had in the story of the capture or the conquest. The destruction. Why capture? Why conquest? The destruction of Jericho. Although we're going to see it was not absolute total destruction. one of the features of the narrative, which made it a theological narrative, not only that God was involved in doing it, was that constant repetition of the fact of cherem, that the booty was not survivors, and booty was not to be taken. It was supposed to be utterly destroyed, except for the precious metals, which would go to the treasury of God. I saw today, although we did that last week, I saw today there's quite a bit of discussion about what that might mean. Could it possibly mean treasure of God, that it's destroyed and it goes to that heavenly temple? That's something I hadn't thought of, but there is a stream of thought like that in modern commentaries, or perhaps they're earlier. I didn't notice who said what in the summation. But there's a lot of talk as to what temple would it be referring to. Of course, at this time, there is no temple. The way I think it's meant to be understood in the context of the narrative, we're still going over last week a little bit, Roberta and Klaus. In the context of the narrative was that whatever it is, it goes to God. Whether it's the priests that are collecting stuff for the temple that will be, that the precious metals, they go to God. It doesn't matter if it was. There's talk in research about whether that it probably went to the temple in Gilgal, and then other scholars that came after said, "Yeah, but we don't have any evidence of a temple in Gilgal." Well, we think there was a temple in Gilgal, and we talked a little bit about that. It made the story sounds like it's an etiology, explanation of why there is a temple in Gilgal, but we don't have any stories about it. There's so much we don't know. There's absolutely so much we don't know, which is why I personally always go back to what I feel I'm hearing from the narrator himself. What is the narrator? What are the values, the lessons the narrator is trying to teach us? And in that, there is the historical aspect. For instance, if the city of Jericho was a mound, a tell of stones, especially if it wasn't a mound of earth, but a pile of stones, and children are walking by with their grandmother and their grandfather, say, Saba, Savta, why is there a pile of stones here? And then the answer is, well, that's because when our ancestors came here, they washed around and the walls came tumbling down. That to me is the most convincing historical explanation of the story. You can't prove anything like that, but it's something that makes sense. And that too comes into the story today as well. Ha'ai, as I mentioned last week, Ayin Yud means ruins. That's what it means. And then we have another place called Beit Aven. Unless you think it's the house of stone, that would be with a bet. It's spelled Aleph Vav Nun, which means house of disaster, right? And then we're going to have a place called Emek Achor, a valley of curse. All the names, at least going forward here, are metaphorical names. I think all of them are. I think pretty much it seems to me that all of them are metaphorical names. Let's go back to something else we've studied before. I know I'm referring to things that not everybody here has done together, but some of us have been studying together for 8 years now. The book of Ruth, that lovely 4-chapter book where truth, not truth. There's other reasons why the book was written. According to Zakovich, it was written in the Second Temple period as a polemic against those priests led by Ezra and Nehemiah who were trying to who demanding that the men who were in the land of Israel during the exile and married non-Israelite wives divorce their wives. This was a polemic because Ruth is from Moab. But that aside, all the names in the book of Ruth have meaning to them. Starting with Ruth from the word re'ut, the ayin gets the ayin gets the guttural ayin gets lost. Ruth means friendship. Naomi, the pleasant one. Boaz, the strong one. Machlon and Kilion, the sickly ones. Okay, all right. So back to our story now. So we're going to start with the end of last week, just so we know where we're going. And Sue Spicer, why don't you begin us off at 6:26 to 7:1.
At that time, Joshua pronounced this oath. Anyone who undertakes to fortify the city of Jericho is hereby under God's curse. Its foundations shall be laid at the cost of their firstborn, and its gates set up at wait a minute. The gate set up at the Israelite,
At the cost of their youngest.
oh, at the cost of their youngest. God was with Joshua, and his fame spread throughout the land. The Israelites, however, violated the proscription. Achan, son of Carmi, son of Zabidai, son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah, took of that which was prescribed, and God was incensed with the Israelites.
Okay, so we started with, again, the pronouncing that the oath was here not to take anything. This oath is even worse. It's even more strict. Never ever build up the city. And that's going to have implications for a story much later down the line in the historiographical literature. When we get to that, we'll remember this oath here, this curse here, because it seems a little bit out of place here. Why would you rebuild this particular place? But the major part of the oath that was, or the curse, or oath / curse, and they're very similar semantically in Hebrew, is that you couldn't take anything from it, and yet somebody did take something from it. This is after Joshua. Joshua, on one hand, again, the text emphasizes, as we ended with last week, emphasizes his leadership. All the time, the text has been building him up to be as high as, close to as high as Moses was, and we had a number of verses that did that, scattered throughout the chapters we've done until now. So we have Joshua in total full control, it feels like, and then, however, there's that in Hebrew, for those that can follow the Hebrew, Vaima'alu b'nei Yisrael. That, however, is the simple vav. Vav often means and. It also can change the tense of what follows in the word, vav haipuch. But in this case, it's vav ha'aval. It's both. It's both the grammatical one changes the tense to past tense, but it's also it symbolizes here not the word and, but. That's why you have however. And prescription is that word that we don't use often in our own lives, which means cherem, is translation of cherem, which has to do with setting the booty aside, not touching anything, destroying it, or perhaps dedicating it to God's treasury. And here it says the Israelites had violated, yet who are the Israelites who violated it?
Archon and
To give a
Zabdi.
list.
Well, is it a list or is it?
So it's a person.
It's just one person. So that's an interesting thing, right? So the Israelites violated. It was only one, right? And how often, this is just a side comment, how often do we do that with groups as well? They, what do you mean they? It's just one schmuck amongst them did something wrong, right? It's the they, who's the they thing, right? That's, I'm confident, yeah. Them and they, okay. Which is very complicated now that people have different pronouns, including they and them. But in earlier times when pronouns were understood differently by many people, still are today, but by most people, if not all people, people would still talk about they, the they. And my question has always been, whether it's mentoring younger rabbis or whether it's counseling and people complaining, family dynamics, it's the they. Tell me who the they is. Let's talk about the they exactly, because they as a group it's too big. Let's break it down. Let's break it down. Okay, but in this case,
It's a great grandson of Yehudah.
so Sasha says he looks like he's a great grandson of Judah. It not only looks like, I mean, that's exactly what the text is saying. Now that's an interesting thing, isn't it, right? Of all the people who could sin here, it's somebody from the house of Judah, which of course is David, Solomon, the only. So what do we know about the author of this tale that tells us that the only guy who messed up and sinned is from the house of Judah? What could we know about him?
He's probably not.
Yeah. So first of all, he's most definitely not. But and then we've had this before in other texts that we've done. We recently did the Torah portion is about Joseph and Benjamin, right? So Joseph and Benjamin get this favored, this elevated status. They're both the sons of Rachel. And of course, Joseph didn't have one son, that it becomes two sons, Ephraim and Menashe, who were both blessed and become as if they are tribes themselves, because Levites kind of move out of the territorial division. So there's still 12 sections left, and in different lists, it's the tribe of Simon who just withers away, is not there. So we always have the number 12, but it's filled in by having Joseph's two sons, and we'll get to that this week's Torah portion, the blessing of, I think it's this week's Torah portion, and of course the kings, northern kings of Israel from Ephraim. Joshua is from Ephraim, so this is a house of Joshua against the house of or let's say the house of Ephraim against the house of Judah, kind of a thing going on here. Yeah, that's definitely it. But and there's a continuation of this story further on in the former prophets, what we call the historical books of the prophets of the Nevi'im going forward, but that's not for today. And of course, God is upset, not only upset, is incensed, is angry with not just this man, but with all of Israel. And that's it. That's something that's difficult for us to deal with today, this collective responsibility, this collective punishment. It's a natural thing, and it's in theological stone here, isn't it, right? God will hold all the people responsible for the act of one, as we will see. All right, so why don't we go on? Sid, you want to read the next section, 2-5?
Sure. Joshua sent some men from Jericho to Ai, which lies close to Beth Aven, east of Bethel, with orders to go up and spy out the country. So the men went up and spied out Ai. They returned to Joshua and reported to him, "Not all the troops need go up. That 2,000 or 3,000 men go and attack Ai. Do not trouble all the troops to go up there, for the people there are few." So about 3,000 of the troops marched up there, but they were routed by the men of Ai. The men of Ai killed about 36 of them, pursuing them outside the gate as far as Shebarim and cutting them down along the descent. And the heart of the troops sank in utter dismay.
Right, or the translation, the literal translation of the last few words are, their hearts melted and became like water. Right. So here's
Mayim,
right. That feeling that we have, when you're in despair. Yeah. So Joshua doesn't know about what's happened. The narrator has told us that Achan has kept the stuff for himself. The narrator has told us, that God is angry with the Israelites. Joshua, though, continues in the next step of the conquest, and that is going from Jericho, in parentheses, an archaeological ruin at the time. From archaeologists, we know it's a ruin from the time, to Ai, whose name means destroyed place. Again, that doesn't. Yeah, okay. It's a little bit suspect. It's next to a place called Beit Aven, which means a house of sadness or sorrow. Bethel is a little bit different. I'm not sure why. I mean, other than those are place names that are in the vicinity of Bethel, the hillsides, north of Jerusalem. Bethel or Bethel, of course, has immense importance for Jacob, Jacob's lying, the ladder of the angels going up and down. That's Bethel, and the northern kingdom's temple, which was in Bethel. So that puts us geographically. They're going from the plains up to the mountains, beginning to get close to, I don't know, the larger collections of people, whatever, to conquer the land. And then there's he sends spies. The spies say, "Oh, don't worry, they're very weak." Sends 2,000 or 3,000 people, which sounds like a lot. and they're routed. And then a surprising number shows up. Dan, I would imagine you caught it, like 36. Why not 47? Why, why 36? And I don't have a lot to say about that. I will in a second. And then they're totally depressed, right? Because you'd say, out of 3,000, they lost 36. So I started with the modern commentaries before I went to rabbinic literature, and I'll do it that way because we don't really have any answers at all. Maybe one of the answers that one finds is that the 2 to 3,000 is an inexact number. Not inexact, it's an inaccurate number. That makes no sense to have that many soldiers that would have gone up. It sounds to me like somebody's trying to be too historical minded here. And therefore, it's 36 is not the problem, it's the other number. Okay, still, why 36? I don't think they did go, oh yes, Klaus.
I don't quite understand. Is this paragraph related to the last paragraph where somebody took some of the gold and now God is punishing them for that in the next campaign? Or are these two totally unrelated?
I could say I don't know.
Okay.
But I have read ahead. Yes, they are related, but the way the story is telling, so the storyteller is doing an excellent job, at least on you, Klaus, right? Because you
Yeah.
already say you want to know, whoa, that's exactly what a good storyteller does, right? Building that thing. But what can I tell you? You're going to have to wait, young man.
Okay, thank you.
Just a few minutes. The
Okay.
36 number, which sticks like which is a little bit strange. There's a debate in the Talmud and I didn't bring it because I'm not really. It's part of a larger conversation. But 36 is Joshua pleased to God. He says, "Why would you decimate the majority of the members of the Sanhedrin? Sanhedrin being 70 plus 1." So if you take away 36, you don't have a majority in the Sanhedrin. So that must be the context of that. Tell me, it's in Tractate Sanhedrin. I didn't look through the whole thing. I just saw that's how they understood it. That's one understanding. It's the majority of the court, whatever. And the other one says it doesn't mean that. It means one particular character, Yair, who's one of the characters in the book of Judges. I don't see a reason to go into it other than to say that the Talmud, the sages in the Talmud had the same question, like, why 30? Well, what does that mean, right? There's probably some, I looked in the medieval commentaries and I didn't see anything, other than things that echoed rabbinic commentaries, like in Radak, Rabbi David Kimchi, and my guess is in Hasidic commentary, somebody has given us the gematria 36 double chai, and that has some meaning or something, who knows? I don't know. Yes, Dan.
Well, perhaps I'm remembering wrong, but the fact that it's saying about 36 or 2 or 3,000 or about 3,000, generally when there are numbers, they aren't hedged. Is there any significance in that in the commentaries?
Well, in the Talmud, it said they take the ke, shloshim v'sheish, about 36. The ke is not 36, but the one Yair who was worth 36 men. He was that strong and important. So they had the same thought that you were having there. Yeah. Okay. Any other ideas or questions before we? One last symbolic name. Here it is written as a name. If you look in the second line from the bottom outside the gate as far as Shivarim, but others have understood that if you look in the Hebrew, and around 36 died. The Irdafum lifnei Hashar, and they chased them, they pursued them until Ad Hashvarim. Some understand that until they were broken. Shever means broken, but probably I think most would say it's a place name here. But again, a place name that has symbolic, metaphorical meaning as the others do. That to me, that's what shines for me in this particular paragraph. But Klaus is getting really impatient. He's angry at me already that I wouldn't give him the answer already. So why don't you go ahead and read 6 to 9, Klaus?
Joshua thereupon rent his clothes. He and the elders of Israel lay until evening with their faces to the ground in front of the ark of God. And they strewed earth on their heads, O my sovereign God, I cried, Joshua, why did you lead this people across the Jordan, only to deliver us into the hands of the Amorites to be destroyed by them? If only we had been content to remain on the other side of the Jordan. O my sovereign, what can I say about Israel has turned tail before its enemies? When the Canaanites and all the inhabitants of the land hear of this, they will turn upon us and wipe out our very name from the earth. And what will you do about it, your great name?
Okay, I'm going to ask you to continue just a moment, but this is in contradistinction to that line that we read up at the top. And God was with Joshua, and his fame spread throughout the land. Everything was going so well. Everything in the book of Joshua until now was exactly, they did everything all right. That's why the title of today's page is, uh-oh, here we go again, right? It's they almost fall back. Joshua falls back on the behavior of the Israelites in the wilderness, right? Why did you make us do that? The kvetching and oh God, what are we going to do? And the defeat, the sin. So it's almost as if, riding high after the victory of the miraculous crossing of the Jordan River, the defeats of everybody on the other side beforehand during Moses' time, Deuteronomy, riding high in the victory of the dramatic miraculous victory over Jericho, and boom, this slap in the face. So you can see Joshua is definitely connecting those two. Joshua hasn't connected those two things yet, but now God's going to do that for him. Go ahead, Klaus, read the next paragraph.
But God answered Joshua, arise, why do you lie prostrate? Israel has sinned. They have broken the covenant by which I bound them. They have taken of the prescribed and put it in their vessels. Here we go. They have stolen. They have broken faiths. Therefore, the Israelites will not be able to hold their ground against their enemies. They will have to turn tail before their enemies, for they have become proscribed. I will not be with you anymore unless you root out from among you what is prescribed. God, go and purify the people. Order them, purify yourselves for tomorrow, for thus says the Eternal, the God of Israel, something
is prescribed.
in the midst, O Israel, and you will not be able to stand up to your enemies until you have purged the prescribed from among you.
Right. Do you think he said it prescribed enough times for us there, right? And last week
Yeah,
as
and I'm
well.
not quite sure what it means.
Yeah, proscribes means something is under, in Hebrew it's cherem. It means
Edict.
it's forbidden. It's confiscate. It's not. It's
Yeah.
what would be other good words, folks? We use today cherem in modern Hebrew as boycott. That's not the right word for here. It's taboo. Taboo. We don't touch it. Right? It can't, has to be destroyed. And look at what happens usually in war, Klaus, is that the soldiers get their whole motivation is that they come back with lots of gold and silver and women, slaves and children and clothes and whatever they come back with, right? And there are wars like that where that's possible, but not this war. And each one is a little bit different, but the idea was, and I think we had that before, if you take their silver and gold, it's going to be idols, right? That's going to dissuade the people from their dedication, and their service to God, one God with no, if you take their women, they will pull you away in a very anthrocentric point of view, pull you away from the way that you know with God, you men, by the way, in the same way that Solomon, who married all these foreign women, that's what happened to him. He built for them different temples to their own home religions, and that was when Solomon was done, the kingdom split up, right, under his two sons. So the reward and punishment, this is very, very Deuteronomic, right? The tit for tat kind of a thing. But there's something that needs to be done, because Joshua needs to find out himself, or the people need to go through a process themselves that will lead them to the culprit here. Okay, you notice that God doesn't tell him who the culprit is. The narrators told us, but God doesn't say who it is, because the people are responsible. Joshua, as their leader, is, and the people themselves are all hold this collective responsibility. So they need to solve this issue in a communal fashion. Okay, Malka 14:15.
Tomorrow morning you shall present yourselves by tribes. Whatever tribe God indicates shall come forward by clans. The clan that God indicates shall come forward by ancestral houses, and that ancestral house that God indicates shall come forth man by man. Then who is indicated for proscription, and all that is his shall be put to the fire, because he broke the covenant of God and because he committed an outrage in Israel.
Right, so this seems to be, it's going to be a long trip, a long day, right? And it feels like the idea is everybody's watching. It's again building the suspense in with the motivation is pedagogical, right? The people need to see this. They need to see this slowly sifting out that we're going to get to the bottom of this, and therefore it becomes a large ceremony, ritualistic ceremony. Malka, go ahead and read the next one, please.
Early next morning, Joshua had Israel come forth by tribes, and the tribe of Judah was indicated. He then had the clans of Judah come forward, and the clan of Zerah was indicated. Then he had the clan of Zerah come forward by ancestral houses, and Zabdi was indicated. Finally, he had his ancestral house come forward man by man, and Achan, son of Carmi, son of Zabdi, son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah, was indicated.
Okay. Now, we don't know how the indication happened, right? Was it the Sid is probably thinking of the Urim Vitumim, right? The magical stones, are they lighting up in a certain way? We're not told, because in truth, that interests us, but that doesn't interest the storyteller. Storyteller just wants people to know that the truth will be gotten. And it's a long process. It's a process, I guess you could call it a process of elimination. All the other tribes, okay, go, and till you get to this one man, and then we get to this dramatic kind of a meeting. Troy, you want to read for us 1921?
Sure, I'll do my best. Then Joshua said to Achan, my son, pay honor to the Eternal, the God of Israel, by making confession. Tell me what you have done. Do not hold anything back from me. Achan answered Joshua, it is true. I have sinned against the Eternal, the God of Israel. This is what I did. I saw among the spoil a fine Shaphnir mantle, 200 shekels of silver, and a wedge of gold weighing 50 shekels, and I coveted them and took them. They are buried in the ground in my tent with the silver under the mantle.
Okay, so super specific, right? And it's not, there needs to be this process of confession as well, which we know from our various faith traditions. We know that you've got to confess in the Jewish tradition. We'll focus on that right now. We have different opportunities to confess in order for us to be forgiven in God's eyes, but also with other human beings. We need to make amends by telling them what we have done. That was not created with the 12-step program. It existed beforehand. The 12-step program has in a very, very wise way utilized those elements. and also stipulated that if it will make things worse, you don't do that. Also, that's something that we have in rabbinic literature as well. So that's from a person-to-person point of view. From a person-to-God point of view, which this is. Yes, there are implications on the person-to-person level, the interpersonal level here, because if one sins against God, then everybody else, those 36 guys that died, the text is telling us really is because of this sin. So it is interpersonal, but ostensibly it's between God and a human being here, and you so you have to atone in order to reach atonement. You've got to you've got to admit what you've done. You've got to confess. You've got to do confession. But as we will see, that doesn't let you off the hook. All right, Troy, why don't you read another one for us?
You're muted.
22, 23.
I apologize. I was still muted.
No problem.
Joshua sent messengers who hurried to the tent, and there was a mantle buried in his tent with the silver underneath. They took them from the tent and brought them to Joshua and all the Israelites and displayed them before God.
Okay, kind of reminds me of these displays that Lahavdil. It's different, but that my first thing comes up every time when I could go to Israel and say every day there's another picture in the Israeli press about weapon catches that were found under the tunnels in order to justify. But what happens here all the time? The police will line up all the drugs that they've taken and the weapons and put it all out in a place, part of the press conference. Yeah, it's part of that pedagogical aspect of confession and catching the culprit. And he came clean though. We want to say, but look at that, he came clean, right? He came clean. But Roberta, you want to read the next part?
Then Joshua and all Israel with him took Achan, son of Zerah, and the silver, the mantle, and the wedge of gold, his sons and his daughters, his ox, his donkey, and his flock, and his tent, and all his belongings, and brought them up to the valley of Ahor. And Joshua said, "What calamity have you brought upon us? God will bring calamity upon you this day." And all Israel pelted him with stones. They put them to the fire and stoned them. They raised a huge mound of stones over him, which is still there. Then God's anger subsided, and that is why the place was named the Valley of Ahor, as is still the case.
Opa. Confession, no confession, returning, no returning, boom. And not only him, but his entire family, his ox, even the tent.
Retribution.
So it's retribution, but it's also, I think, the tent, for instance, and everything, that sends a signal of it's contaminated. Everything has been spiritually, theologically contaminated, and therefore needs to be absolutely destroyed. And in the same way that this one man's sin had implications on the collective, it's the collective who's involved in the ceremony in finding him, and it's the collective who take part in his prosecution, in implementing his punishment or execution. Thank you. Execution is the word I was looking for. Thank you. In his execution. Yeah. You know, I had said to people over the years that I was less into this, how come we're doing Judges before Joshua? And I said, Joshua is a rough book, and we're going to see some rough stuff. This is a pretty rough thing to look at, right? And, even though there's a mitzvah of the son who misbehaves, who is also stoned by the public because he drinks and he eats too much, but that's like tucked in between all these other laws, doesn't stick out. Like, this is the whole point of the chapter. The whole point of the chapter, and maybe even the point of the chapter beforehand of Jericho, was to show God says to the people of Israel, I will give you success, but you need to adhere strictly to the rules that I'm giving you. If you break those rules, then this is what's going to happen. And so it feels like 2 chapters have been devoted to this. And after we read this, it's like it's like, you know, we don't even have that glow of the Battle of Jericho and the walls came tumbling down, if we had such a glow, assuming we had it. Okay. So this is difficult stuff, and it has to do with taking responsibility for messing up. So I want to say a few words about that and my understanding, today in this day of the year and this point of the war in Israel. But before that, are there comments or questions, or how do people feel? How do they think about this text? Yes, please, Troy. Go ahead.
While I know it was much later, Ezekiel comes through, if I'm recalling correctly, and pretty much indicates that the sins of the father will not be passed on to the children if they live a righteous life. And vice versa. If they'll turn from their sins and keep the commandments, their sin will be forgiven. So then I read this, which once again I realize this was written much earlier, but I just can't help but feel a little confused on marrying those 2 concepts together. So thank you for allowing me to ask.
Yeah, so good confusion. That's healthy confusion. The first point I'll make, I think, is that we should probably not expect comprehensive approaches in the Hebrew Bible to any given thing. Different voices have different views. And that theology that we could call the tit for tat theology in slang, or it could be called the Santa Claus theology as well. If you're good, you'll get gifts. If not, you won't get gifts, right? The kind of things you want. So be good for heaven's sake. That changes. Now, was this text written before that text in Ezekiel? I know many people, because they appear this way in the book. One of the points that I'm making, Troy, is that when these things were written, could have been hundreds of years after they even were supposed to have happened. Even if they didn't happen, they were supposed to have happened a particular date. It was years later. Yes, of course, on a chronological timeline, the conquest of Canaan is earlier than Ezekiel. By the way, Jeremiah has the same there's a passage in Jeremiah which has that same theology, and we'd call it perhaps the updated theology. If we think, as you were proposing in linear fashion, that this was the early view, we could say, well, that changed. The theology changed, as is displayed in Jeremiah and Ezekiel. The chapter you're talking about is the famous quote of, shall the parents eat sour grapes, and yet the children will feel the unpleasantness on their gums. Yeah, because Ezekiel was also reacting to the fact that the people were saying, oh, it's not our fault Jerusalem was destroyed, right? It's our parents' fault. And then he comes and says, no. So there could be a different answer in every situation, right? That's number one. Number two, this could be from a totally different time. That's one explanation. Or it could be from the same time period, but a different school of thought. That's the way that that's where I've been at in recent years. And think in terms of not as any kind of, there wasn't a synod of biblical, thanks, okay. Why do we have so many Orami bars? Okay. All right. There wasn't a synod of biblical writers that got together, right? The way that the church tried to do, and even then I'm not sure it was terribly successful. But there wasn't an editor-in-chief of the series of biblical commentaries that's trying to have them more, and even that doesn't happen. But a book, a collection of one's articles that we often will see there. We can tell if something's been edited well if those kinds of references and contradictions exist, because we have this expectation of things being comprehensive. I think I'm using that word correctly. So that would be kind of a relatively short answer to that question. That's a sensitive, really good question about theology. The theology is not uniform in the Hebrew Bible. right? So, so yeah, that's one. Go ahead, Teresa.
Maybe part of it has to do with the idea that you can't always expect forgiveness.
Or it may be a little bit deeper than that. It may be, and that's how the rabbis understand certain sins. You're only forgiven, truly, if you're using forgiven in the same way that atonement is used, you could only be atoned, some sins can only be atoned for with death. See, we're used to thinking in our world, which is a Christian Jewish world of the 20th, 21st century, that if you're forgiven, then that's the end of it, right? Then the close. Let's move onward, right? The Talmudic literature, and that's held in medieval Jewish literature as well, about sin, about atonement, tshuva, is that averot chilul shem shemayim, chilul, chilul Hashem, what's the desecration of God's name in public can only be atoned for with death, without going to detail exactly what that is. But that's kind of a thing. There are different levels as to where for some things Yom Kippur is the Yom Kippur in ancient times with the worship, with the sacrifices, that atoned for the people, as long as they did their, according to the rabbis, which wrote after the destruction of the temple, as long as they made amends beforehand. Then the atonement, the Day of Atonement itself today, for instance, in medieval Jewish thought, the Day of Atonement atones for sins if you've done everything you're supposed to be done, except for if you have defiled God's name in public. I could give you a few examples that have come across my mind over the years. When famous rabbis are found to be sexually abusing children, that would be one of those major things. Maybe Madoff. I say maybe. I don't know. I don't know. It's all what we think. We don't know what. I don't think we know.
But in Vidui, when we do Vidui, isn't there a section in there about for the sin that we committed by something about taking God's name in vain, or?
Right, but taking names, God. So what Malka is referring to is a paragraph where there's a long version and a short version that we use lots of times during the Day of Atonement for those that are not familiar with the Jewish liturgy, we use them a lot on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. We use them in the days leading up to. Some people have it in their daily liturgy as well. And in those, it's kind of a menu of sins so that you can. It's meant for you to think of each one where you fall on that on those different categories. But even if there was, I don't remember if there's one that says al chet shechatanu, b'chilul shem shamayim.
By defaming God's name. Maybe it says defaming God's name.
Yeah, there's different things, but even if that was Malka, so again, I don't expect consensus from the different, from the liturgy and biblical sources and medieval thought. There's not, it's not always it's that the theologians are not always the ones who are writing the liturgy. Very often it's folk traditions and things like that. But there is that view. Now you've never heard me say that before, probably because that's not in the Torah that I choose to teach. Those are the things. But that does bother us. Of course it bothers us, Teresa. The fact that he went through the process, he came clean, he gave it back, and boom. Not only him, but his kids, his ox. And for those that are fighting for the rights of tents, even his tent. Yes, Klaus, you wanted to say something. Klaus, go ahead.
I think the whole thing goes back to the Ten Commandments in a way. Thou shalt not take God's name in vain.
Yeah, although the Ten Commandments seem to be talking about certain oaths or things that you're saying using God's name, Yud He Vav He, and this would be an extension of that, in that you have taken God's word, you have taken God's word, God's instructions in vain, or you've been, But yes, this is all these are desecrated. They come from the ancient world of taboos and things, but there's one more thing here, and that is all these things explain place names. These are stories, etiologies that explain the names of places that existed at the time when these stories were told. And the final one that I want to refer to is Emek Achor. The word Achar is reflected in calamity, right? Which is, what calamity have you brought? That is the root in Hebrew, Achar, and it's kind of the valley of calamity, the valley of disaster. And yeah, I don't know what's going to happen in the days to come, in the years to come of this war. I reflect, of course, on this passage, looking to see who might be responsible for what has happened. And people were holding off. I, as an Israeli, was holding off for a while. I had my own thoughts, of course, that night. I had my own thoughts. And a lot has been written. And I'm talking about amongst Jewish community right now. I'm not talking about the issue of how of anti-Semitism, of the very complex issue of anti-Semitism, the very complex issue of Zionism. I'm reading my teacher and friend Shaul Magid's book on the whole topic. He writes it before the war, but it certainly explains a lot or gives a lot of yeah. We'll talk about that another time. But for now, who's responsible? Why did this happen? And although Israelis kind of held off, it's in the midst of the war. Well, you can't do that forever. And in the meantime, there's a government to run. In the meantime, there's people whose lives are ruined, are in disaster, are in calamity, that need immediate help. So there's this war now. It's a war, a battle over the budget in the Knesset right now, over getting this a certain enough amount of money to those from that area, and not having money go to others that are not affected by the war. There's a lot. We can't just not. Somebody has to go through this long, arduous process of singling out those who were responsible, and not the single soldier who missed the particular intelligence person who missed a report, or the officer of the female intelligence report, a woman who reported, a soldier who reported but didn't relate to her seriously because she's a woman. All these things are things that may have happened, but certainly have come up. We're talking about the government of the state of Israel, and we may be talking about the people of Israel as well. We may have to talk about at some point, how are all of us responsible? That, we're not responsible for the evil, the wickedness of Hamas, but how Hamas was able to grow, and how we try to make sure this doesn't happen going forward. I think all of us play a part in that, not just those living in Israel. We can no longer say that well, I don't have an opinion about that because I don't vote and I don't pay taxes in Israel. I think that we all, certainly those of us in the Jewish community, unless we say, I'm not part of the Zionist movement, I'm not part of the Zionist program. And that's possible to do. Is you could be very Jewish without doing that today. I used to not understand that. I do today. But if you want to be part of the Jewish community that has an ongoing, living, organic relationship with the state of Israel and the people of the state of Israel, it needs to be all the people of the state of Israel, not only the Jews, but it also needs to take some responsibility for the good things, but also for the bad things. What that means exactly, I have no idea. I'm raising this as an issue, but those are my reflections upon reading this, and the getting down to the bottom of this. Who's responsible for our first mess up? I would use another word, but we're on Facebook. Who's responsible for the first, here in the book of Joshua I'm in right now, Yes, Roberta. Please unmute first.
I'm not sure I understand what would be gained if you find the quote unquote guilty party. The purpose, it was a it was an action, it was an explosion waiting to happen. The question, who pushed the button at this particular time, is almost irrelevant. It doesn't really matter. That simmering resentment and anger and the issue was always there and has been there. The individual who, caused this particular thing should be punished, I'm sure, but it doesn't, I don't think it makes any difference. What it just uncovered that simmering sore that's been there for years.
So yeah, I hear you. I hear you what you're saying. So what one, and I agree. I don't mean to say there's one particular person or one particular political party or even the government right of Israel. This is a long-term problem. It's not something that popped out. The people who are surprised, I think, are not students of the history, certainly over the last 50 years of occupation, but even since the founding of the state of Israel 75 years ago. Where people differ, Roberta, where perhaps you and I, but people have different views, is this simmering because of an unquenchable hatred of the Jewish people, the Israelite people, that has always been from the time of Joshua? By the way, we're talking about people who were coming in from the land and destroying, taking. Yeah, where is it from that time? Is it from the late 19th century when Ashkenazic Jews started to move to the Holy Land? Where is it from? Is it because the Palestinians never accepted the state of their existence? There's lots of different views about the Biva, but all of us need to take into consideration who put the simmering pot on the fire, right? How did the pot get there? Who cut up the vegetables? Who gave the fuel for the heat to continue to simmer? I'm using your metaphor, right? I think it's a good one. What I'm saying is not that I know, not so much to find the culprit. That was our story here, but to take responsibility, those of us here, instead of standing aside. It feels that at least I'll speak just for myself, I feel that I need to be, once again, a little bit more involved in what's happening in the state of Israel than I have been. And as you know, most of you know, I'm pretty involved, right? Compared to most people, right? I'm pretty, yeah. But I think that's something that I need to give a lot more thought to, and I'd like us all as our community goes forward in our study, and that was one of the reasons to do the book of Joshua, to take a look at the mirror, so to speak, by looking at these ancient texts, which are very simplistic. Roberta, here it's very cut and clear. That one man did one thing, and boom, and the problem solved. I want to end on something nice, a positive note, though. Okay, or something that I was tickled to learn when I was, and I only thought of doing this morning, so it's not on your sheet. Let me know if you want to see this. There is in the book of Hosea, right, one of the prophets, right, the early prophets, "V'natati l'Adonai et Karmel misham, v'et emek achor lefetach tikva." Right? I will give her vineyards from there, and the valley of Achor, that is the valley of calamity, will become a plowland of hope. Others would say an opening for hope, an opening for hope. And you may know that Petach Tikva, this word here, is the name of the first of the Moshavot, of the communal settlements in Israel, land bought by the Rothschilds. But what most people don't know is this section here. It was originally that settlement, that group of people who were leaving Jerusalem. It's one of the first groups that left Jerusalem to settle the land in the late 19th century. I'm pretty sure that's when it was. It was supposed to be near Jericho, but the local sheikh, I guess, Abdul Hamid, I didn't look into it, but I just know this from Hebrew University when I was studying this. They had to move from there. I had heard originally that there were too many problems there. It wasn't a hospitable place to live, so that just goes to show I didn't do the deep dive to see what historical documents from that time does. But the original, everybody agrees, the original name of of the settlement of Petach Tikva was supposed to be in Emek Achor, as if to say, from the valley of calamity, we'll make this into a opening for hope, Petach Tikva. And so I hope that's a way of ending on a kinder note, on a more positive note. May this Emek Achor that we're in right now, this valley of this ravine, this chasm of calamity, somehow turn into a opening of hope. Okay, thank you for all being here, and a good new year to those who celebrate that particular night. And I'll see some of you tomorrow at the Isaiah class. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks